Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Climate Resiliency Workshop tonight. My name is Ashley Painter. I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Oldsmar and the Project Manager on our Resiliency Plan. Also joining us tonight, we have Mike Flood, who is our Project Manager for our consultant, WSP. He'll be doing part of the presentation tonight as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat portion or the Q&A. We will be answering some of the questions in the Q&A, but also at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A portion. As we go through, we will be doing some polls, and also, like I said, feel free to chat with us. We do have some people online that will be helping with the chat portion as well. If you have any issues, just let us know too. We can try to fix them as we go along. So like I said, we are doing the Climate Resiliency Plan workshop. And so what we want today is to get your feedback and your input on how we should prioritize some of the actions and metrics that we have going into the final plan. So just a little bit of background of where we are and what we've already done with this plan. We started out by identifying different climate hazards that will affect the city of Oldsmar. We identified 5 of them: sea level rise, storm surge, extreme temperatures, extreme weather events, and sorry, my brain just went blank. Mike, do you have the last one?
Temperature, so it's precipitation.
Precipitation, that's the other one. And then after we determined what our climate hazards were, we looked at all of the assets that we have within the city, and we made an inventory of everything that we had. And once we had our inventory, we determined what the exposure of each asset was to the different climate hazards, and began to rank the vulnerabilities and start prioritizing. This is where you're coming in. We've done a bit of the ranking of our vulnerabilities and prioritizing, but we want to get your input on some of the actions that we've identified, and also some of the different ways we want to think about how the actions should be prioritized. So understanding our climate risk here in Oldsmar. Like I said, one of the things that we are looking at is temperature. We are seeing that as we go into the future, our temperatures are rising. And if you're looking at our charts right here, you're seeing that the temperatures don't seem to be going up that much. If you're just going a couple of degrees by degrees. But even a small amount makes a big difference. And what we are seeing is that as we go forward, the number of days that we're having over 90 degrees is increasing quite a bit. Excuse me. We're also seeing that not only are our highs getting higher, but our lows are getting higher. And what that means is that at night, when we typically are able to cool down a little bit, those temperatures aren't getting as low. So we're not cooling during the day. So the warms feel warmer because we never actually get to a full cool temperature. We're also under our flood risk. We had 3 things that we've looked at for different types of flood risk: sea level rise, storm surge, and then rainfall flooding. We developed some models and maps on how these are going to affect our city and our different areas, and I'm going to have Mike go through some of this with you.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, evening, everyone. Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to work through as it relates to the term climate change is to define it in a way that would enable effective decision making. So one of the things, as Ashley pointed out, is we wanted to create the data that could help us with that decision making. So we utilized some modeling efforts in order to be able to define this for the city and for you. And so the things that were kind of looked at were sea level rise, what would sea level rise as a kind of a constant source of flooding look like today and into the future, and then what would storm surge, the potential for storm surge looking like today and into the future, and then what would the opportunity for precipitation-based flooding look like today into the future. So in order to be able to enable that, we engaged some of our modeling team to create that material. So here, what you see on your slide here today is kind of the first set of results, which is kind of a set of maps on where you would anticipate coastal flooding. If you can see on the left, that basically these are areas where you would anticipate some type of tidal flooding, the areas of the city that you would anticipate some type of tidal flooding on for regular increments, and then the one on the right is what that would look like with additional 4 feet of sea level rise in the bay. Next, go ahead and flip through. Now here we transition into the series of probabilities for storm surge flooding. The one on the left is basically identifying return, return probabilities of storm surge events, and this is similar to the FEMA flood zones that have been identified for the city. And then the one on the right basically shows how it transitions from today to the future with additional areas of storm surge. So as we kind of walk through this set, you'll see that there's the 25-year, the 50-year, the 100-year, the kind of the terms you've seen before, and how that is going to be changing over time to increase the opportunity and the probability of flooding from now to the end of the century. So you can just kind of flip through there, Allie. Up forward, here we go. And then so basically the idea is we created that data point in order to be able to enable better decision making for the city. Next slide, thank you. So the other thing that we looked at is where is precipitation flooding anticipated to occur in the city, and there's two important things to know about this analysis. And you can see the first one at the bottom. Basically, these return period precipitation values are, the probability that you would see this level of precipitation. So, kind of unlikely to very unlikely in terms of the precipitation, but it's important for decision making and policy to establish these values. So the way this was generated is this utilized the determination of future precipitation patterns and also the anticipation of tidal flooding changes that would be in the bay by 2040. So what that means is basically that more precipitation would be falling onto the ground, but there would also be higher water in the bay, which would limit somewhat the ability of the stormwater system to drain into the bay. So then as you walk through, you can kind of see these areas that would be anticipated to be flooding by rainfall for the 25, next slide, the 50, and the next slide, and the 100-year event. So basically all this was generated. You can see that one of the things that we've done here on the lower left is one of the things that we did for each of these assessments, even to the tidal and to the storm surge and to the precipitation level, is try to get to the understanding of the depth of water in each of these areas. And then that depth of water was used in the risk assessment to understand how that water depth may impact city facilities for each of these conditions. And that was basically an important factor to include in the way that the understanding of risk was generated. Next slide. Ashley.
All right, so when we were defining our risk, we had two metrics that we were looking at. The first was the likelihood of flooding impacts. Is it going to happen? Is a place going to flood in just a 100-year storm? So that's something like a Category 5 or a 4 or 5 hurricane, or is it going to flood in something like a 25-year event, which would be like Eta that just came through, a tropical storm? Next, we looked at the categorization of our assets. So our 3 categories. Minor is that community services aren't going to be impacted at all if an event happened. Major is there will be some impact to community services. And then a significant would be that there would be an impairment to safety and also to community operations, not just services, but the actual functioning of the city. So when we're looking at our matrix here, if we're the things that fall into the category to the bottom right and this high priority assets, So they have significant impacts and also a high likelihood of being flooded or having an impact from an event. Then those are the things that we prioritize higher in our actions and in our plan. And things that are in this upper left-hand corner that are, it's a minor impact and then it's not really likely to happen. They're things that we might look at into the future, but for now, they're not a high priority on our list. So for the flooding, the three things that we did when we're doing our risk analysis is first that we looked at our impact elevation. And this is the elevation of a specific asset, whether it be a building, a park, roads, different things, and at what level of flooding would that operation be affected. Next, we identified the different flooding elevations and probabilities. So looking at, would it be a 25-year storm that then impacted an asset, or would it need to be something more severe? And then last week, we categorized our assets and based on the likelihood and the timing. So would this be something that we need to concern ourselves with today because we're already seeing flooding? Or is it something that maybe in the next 50 years or 100 years, we're going to start seeing flooding? So it's on our radar, but it's not something that we are highly concerned about right now. On this map, we're kind of looking at, you can see all the little red boxes are different city assets and properties. They're not all of them. Obviously, you can't see the underwater pipes and things that we have below ground, but these are the things that are basically above ground and how they are going to be affected by flooding in the next several years. So this lightish blue color is our current state, and these are going on when I say a 25-year storm surge, that is basically like what we saw with Tropical Storm Eta. It's a tropical storm or maybe up to a Category 1 storm. And what we did see and through these maps is that our flooding lines were almost exactly in line with these for this last tropical storm. And then as we move into the future, you can see that those floodings and the storm surge are going to go a little bit farther inland, and eventually towards the end of the century, where they're going to start crossing even over to Tampa Road. And this is just for a basic low level, like I said, tropical storm. It is not something as severe as a Category 4 or 5 hurricane coming through. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of poll with you. Currently, the main thing that we use to define risk, most of the metrics are concerned with direct physical risk to an asset. But we want to know what other factors, other than just a physical thing, such as a building getting flooded or something like that, what other factors should we consider when we're making these decisions? And there are some check boxes on our poll that you can check more than one thing. And then there's also a section where if you want to write in your own answer, if you think there's something we missed, go ahead and put that in for it. And we'll give you about a minute or two to finish that. So it looks like I just said you could choose more than one, and it does look like you are unable to choose more than one. If there is more than one that you think should be a high priority, just add it into the chat for us. Okay, we're going to leave the poll open, so if you haven't already responded, you're welcome to do so at any time. It does look like the top priority we have is public safety, which makes sense, followed by outage duration and economic impacts, and then the comment of a social equity. So this is good to know. It's we are considering public safety in our plan and how that's going to affect our residents, whether it is to your own property or to say our infrastructure that might affect how you can live if if there's no wastewater system or something like that. So now that we know what our risks are, how are we going to turn those into actual actions? So there are three basic ways that we look at, or different strategies that we look at when we're talking about actions. The first is a political level strategy, and that is establishing policies and making plans, planning process changes more resilient. So it is stuff like increasing the base flood elevation, so the elevation at which people can build at, or changing where where you can build, things like that. It's also making policies that would affect how we operate as a city, like how maybe how we provide our services to the community. The next one is an area-wide strategy. So this is something that we would do on our public land, but it would have a wider impact for the entire community and also potentially even private properties. So things like restoring our wetlands, which are really great at absorbing water. So by us restoring the wetlands on public lands, it helps absorb the water so that private properties aren't flooded. And lastly, facility level strategies. So this is things that we do specific to a facility. It's putting on armor, it's hardening things or putting up walls around something to make it more resilient and be able to withstand whatever comes. We're going to go through a couple of, this is not extensive of everything that we have going into the plan. This is just a few ideas of a couple of different places within the city. WRF is our wastewater reclamation facility. This is where all of our wastewater goes and also where we make our reclaimed water. And some of the things, if you had noticed on the maps, is that our WRF facility is pretty close to the coast and is in a bit of a flood zone. So some of the things that we are looking at is ways to reduce the amount of flooding in that property. Some of the things that we could do for the short term is just reduce the inflow and infiltration that's coming in. So that's basically like lining our pipes so that if there are holes or if there are some small fissures in our pipes, then closing those up so that extra water from storms don't enter into our wastewater facility and overload it. Also, the same type thing with manholes, making sure that they are more watertight so we're not processing stormwater, as much stormwater, and we're just processing our wastewater. Some other things that if we're going into our midterm, and just, I didn't say this before, but short term for us, we're defining it as 1 to 5 years. Something that we're thinking of in the next couple of years, we can implement it now. Midterm is something in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's going to take a little bit of planning and funding to do, but it's something that can be done in the not so distant future. And then long term is something over 10 years. It's something that is going to take a lot of designing, a lot of planning, and typically are the higher cost actions as well. So one of the midterm things that we can do is just elevating structures. By elevating our electrical systems, that goes a long way because a lot of our wastewater stuff is meant to be underwater anyway because it does process water and wastewater. But electrical systems aren't made for being underwater. So just elevating those electrical boxes can do a lot to making sure that our wastewater plant runs smoothly. And then in our long term, our biggest long term would be a potential relocation of the facility. This is something that takes years and years of planning and siting and is not something that's easy. it would be, and when we say long term on this, we're not even looking at 10 years, we're looking at more like a 30 to 50 years down the road, because it is not something that would be an easy feat to do. We're going to move on to our parks and our natural areas. There are a lot of things that we can do in our parks in the short term, which is really good. Our parks here in Oldsmar, about 40% of our land is park or preserve, which is great because I think a lot of people in our city, they love that about it, is that there's so much natural area around. It is also really great because our parks, a lot of them are coastal and they absorb the water that would be going into our residents' houses. So by having Mobley Bayou Preserve there, that actually help prevents flooding for a good portion of that part of the city. So some of the things that we could do for a short term that are fairly inexpensive to do is building resilient or living shorelines. And that can be done a couple of ways. Putting out oyster reefs. Oyster reefs help break down wave action, and they also help clean our water. Just so where we are in the bay, we don't have a lot of water movement. So this actually will help keep some of the nutrients, help keep the nutrient levels in our water down, which also help our plants and our environment as well. Doing wetlands restorations, which we have done in the past, doing with, like I said, with Mobley Bayou. We also have Broker Creek, part of Broker Creek is in Oldsmar. So making sure that our wetlands are in the best operating and most natural way that they can be. That goes a really long way. Wetlands are basically, that's what they're built to do, is to absorb that extra water. And they also provide a lot of breaks in this wave action when it comes through. So even if we have water coming in, there's a big difference in a wave hitting you at 1 mile per hour and a wave hitting you at like 10 miles per hour. That's a whole different a bit of damage that will happen. And then in the long term, as we're looking, is building living walls and living seawalls. And we're not talking about a giant wall around the city. This is just using plants and nature, and even building kind of almost like a dune type things to stabilize the eroding soil and to the areas that are getting worn down. Just using nature to do the job of hardened built environment. Okay, so in our adaptation planning selection criteria, as I said before, first we started off by identifying the high risk assets, and then we identified a suite of possible adaptation strategies. When we develop these strategies, you know, if you've ever gone through a process, you come up with a bunch of different ideas, and some are really great and some are not so great. And some seem like they're really great, but maybe once you start thinking about it in different ways, they're not as useful as you thought they would be. So we're in this stage of assessing those adaptation strategies against different criteria. And we're going to get to a poll in just a minute to help us get your feedback on what some of that criteria should be. We are looking at different ways between technical criteria, like is it applicable? Can you even do it? Is there the technology there to do this now? Maybe it's not here now, but maybe it will be in the future. And then looking also at political and social. So if we wanted to do this, but would there, you know, would we get buy-in from regulatory bodies or from our council to be able to do this in public? If we decide that we want to build a giant wall around the city, I'm pretty sure the citizens would not be terribly happy with that. So thinking of different ways and making sure that it is accepted in different circumstances. And then when we're looking at our consequences, co-benefits, that's doing one thing, like if we restored a wetland, we do it for one reason, to reduce flooding, but it also has other benefits of adding more natural area for our citizens to have more recreation. And it improves our water quality. It does other things that are beneficial it wasn't initially built for. And then we also have, on the kind of opposite of that, other cascading impacts. Some of them could be positive, and others could be negative. You could, increase the wetlands here, and then somehow, I don't know, or build a wall that protects one neighborhood, but then that just diverts the water to another place. So it benefits the one place, but the cascading effect is that now you've just flooded two other neighborhoods. So thinking of different things like that. And once we assess these different strategies, we're going to identify the adaptations that we want to recommend in our plan. So for this next poll, we are going to look at different adaptation actions and what we should prioritize in the planning process. So which of these things, again, it should be able to choose more than one, but if you are not, just let us know in the chat other things that you think should be added to this list that we might not have thought of. Okay, it looks like most everybody has responded. We're going to leave this open until towards the end of the presentation of the workshop. So it looks like our top choice today was cost, which is very important. If we can't afford it, then there's no point in putting it forth as an action. Technical feasibility, that is also a really great point. One thing that we are looking at is that if it's not technically feasible right now, we've all seen that the future moves pretty fast, especially in technology. So it's something that could possibly be done in the near future or in the next maybe 10 years. And then the other two that we had are political and regulatory feasibility and potential cascading impacts, which are all good things. Thank you for that. All right, so what you'll see on the next couple of slides are kind of just visual representation of the chart you saw earlier of different types of adaptation strategies. And this just kind of helps you visualize what we mean when we say short-term, mid-term, long-term. And our short-term one we have here, and this is for our wastewater facility, increasing the elevation of wet wells. So you'll see in that bottom left picture there, that is a wet well, and it is at ground level. So if there's any sort of flooding, then the top of our well is going to be flooded in full. So just by elevating the top of the well, that means that we won't have as much water going in and it won't fill quite as quickly. And our midterm is elevating our electrical. You can already see in this middle picture that the electrical boxes, which are right there and on the poles, they are raised a bit. And this picture here was, it was a flooding event that was it wasn't a really strong storm. It was a heavy rainy summer, but it wasn't a crazy tropical storm coming in. And this is flooding happening. So if we had a higher level of flooding, what we have right now is okay. But in the next few years, when levels are rising, we'll need to start raising up our electrical panels. And in the long term, the relocating of our plant. And you can see in this top right-hand corner, our plant is quite large and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things in there. So to move it and relocate it is not something that's easy to do. And it would take a lot of capital, a lot of funding, but also just a lot of time and planning to do so. And that also goes into a regulatory because we do report to the county, the state, and to federal governments on all of our processes and where we can do things. So just a little bit on our coastal parks. Some of the things we were talking about in our short term, you see in the bottom left-hand corner there, that's an oyster reef, so a reef ball. And those are planted in, you just place them in the water, and then oysters actually recruit onto those, and then they start building their own reef around. Those are really helpful in getting started with creating that barrier for wave action and storm surge. In our midterm, elevating our facilities and raising some of our parking and boardwalk, like piers and things like that. Some things are easier to do than others. Raising a facility is not an easy feat. If we wanted to raise the amphitheater at Ari Olds, it's going to take, that's a lot of electrical and physical things, that construction that would have to be done. But it is a possibility as we go along. There's also ways to build up other parts of the park so that facilities that are harder to move can stay at the level that they're at, but flooding would go around them and intentionally flood other places so that your facilities stay dry. And then in our long term would be also installing, some sort of floodgates, relocating facilities. It's hard to relocate a park, but maybe moving a bathroom within a park is doable. And that, like I said, it not only the construction that we have to think about, it's the underground piping, it's all the other aspects that go into moving a building. So in addition to looking at just the resiliency plan itself, we're also looking at our community rating system. The community rating system is a federal program that is through the National Flood Insurance Program. So what the CRS does is that it takes actions that the city does to help reduce flooding risk, and it lowers the insurance rates for our citizens. So right now we are at a CRS class 6, which saves people within the special flood hazard area, which with the new FEMA maps that are coming out in the next couple of months that will be implemented, will be most of Oldsmar that is south of Tampa Road. So it saves our citizens 20% in those areas. And if you're outside the special flood hazard area, it saves 10% on your flood insurance rates. We are looking at what we've already done and what we can potentially do in the future. How our actions in this plan will help you save more as we go along. And some of the areas that we're doing this is outreach projects. So not only how we do different things on our own public lands, but also how we educate our citizens on their own private property, things that you can do to make your house or your property more resilient. We do a really great job on our open space preservation. Like I told you before, we have about 40% of our land is in parks or preserves. So as a city, we do really well in that category. And then some other things that we're looking at, increasing our stormwater management, our floodplains, and then some different regulatory standards. Those are typically the things that are the levels at which people have to build at, how high your base floor is, things like that, and making sure we are at the most helpful levels with our regulations. All right. So right now we're at the finalization portion of our plan. We'll have the final plan done in May. So throughout the next month and a half, we're going to be finalizing the different actions and strategies that we want to put forth. And as we go forward, after we have a plan, we don't want this to be something that just sits on the shelf and collects dust. We want it to be a true plan of action to go move forward. So once we finish writing our climate resiliency plan, the real work begins, because now we're going to have to start identifying the funding sources for these strategies, incorporating them into our capital plan, and then updating things that are master plans and all that to make sure that these actions are happening. So a few of the key dates that we have going along. We do still are allowing and encouraging public input through April 7th. And this is on anything that you see on the plan. In the handout section of this, there are several handouts on some from the past presentations. It's also, you'll have this presentation. You're welcome to go through all of that. Also visiting resilientoldsmar.com. There's more information on the site and a video to the open house from February. So you're welcome to go through. We would love to hear back from you if there's anything that you see that's confusing, or if you think, hey, I just really, really want you to, consider this. Please let us know. The best way to do that is to email me. My contact information is there, apainter@myoldsmar.com. And then in May, like I said, we will be finalizing the plan. So we are at the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. We did have one question about holding workshops on how individuals can protect their homes, floodgates, and barriers for doorways. We don't have one planned right now, but that is part of our actions going forward and our education. So we are hoping to run those types of workshops going forward, because while it is important that we protect the city assets, it is vitally important that our citizens also know how to protect themselves. So we will be developing some workshops or education materials for how our residents can protect their properties as well. All right. Do you have any other questions or comments? If not, Mike, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Nope, I thought you did a great job, and this is definitely intended to be a resource for the city of Oldsmar, and whatever feedback, if you have feedback today or later, we'd appreciate hearing it as we're developing the plan.
Yes, and we'll say feel free if you have any your neighbors that might be interested, feel free to share this with them. We have another workshop starting at 6, but we have one in person, one on Saturday if there are others that could not make today. But like I said, feel free to share the handouts. My contact information is on it, and we would love to hear back from you guys on other strategies or your input on what we're doing so far. We have no more questions, and I think we will end a few minutes early today and let you guys get to your dinner and your families. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to hear from you soon, and we will hopefully make a great plan for the city. Have a great night.